said it like he was proud of himself. "We transferred the cottage fund to your brother. He needs it more than you do." He actually smiled when he said it. Sat back in his chair, arms crossed, like he just solved a very difficult problem. My mom nodded beside him. My brother, sitting right there at the same kitchen table where I'd eaten 1,000 dinners, didn't say a word, didn't look at me, just stared at his coffee cup. And my fiancé, who had been completely quiet the entire meal, slowly set down his fork. I need to back up. I grew up in a small city in Ontario, the kind of place where everyone knows your neighbor's business and the Tim Hortons on the main road has been there since before you were born. My parents weren't wealthy, but they weren't struggling either. My dad worked in logistics management for most of his career. My mom did bookkeeping part-time from home. We were comfortable. 2 kids, a house with a finished basement, a used Honda Odyssey that my dad called the tank. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is, well, I'll call him what my fiancé privately calls him, which is the golden one. He was the kind of kid who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, even when he very clearly was doing wrong. Failed out of his first year at Western. The program wasn't right for him. Borrowed $3,000 from my parents at 23 and never paid it back. He's finding his footing. Got a girl pregnant, panicked, disappeared for 6 months. He was going through something. I was the one who got a full scholarship to study environmental science at the University of Guelph. I was the one who paid my own rent from second year onward. I was the one who called home every Sunday and showed up every Christmas and remembered their anniversary. But he was the one they worried about. He was the one they talked about at dinner. He was the one they made space for, always, no matter what space had to be cleared away to do it. I told myself it didn't bother me. For a long time, I really believed that. My mom's parents had a cottage up near Parry Sound. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a dock that needed replacing, a wood stove that took 20 minutes to get going in October. But it was ours, in the way that only a place you've spent every summer of your childhood can be yours. I learned to swim off that dock. I caught my first fish there. I cried there when my first real relationship ended at 19. Sitting on the porch with my grandmother while she told me, very practically, that most first loves aren't meant to last. When my grandmother passed away 3 years ago, she left the cottage to my mom. She also left behind a separate account, what my grandmother called the future fund. She'd been putting money into it for years, quietly, without telling anyone. When the estate was settled, we found out it was just over $40,000. My grandmother had left a letter with it. It was addressed to me. She said she'd watched me work hard my whole life. She said she knew things weren't always equal in our family, and she was sorry she hadn't said more about it while she was alive. She said the money was for my future, for a house, a wedding, whatever I needed to build a life I was proud of. I wept for an hour after I read that letter, not just because I missed her, but because she had seen me, really seen me. When I felt like I'd been invisible my whole childhood, she had been watching. My dad volunteered to help manage the account. He said it made more sense to keep it consolidated for tax purposes. I was grieving, I trusted him, and honestly, it didn't occur to me not to. He was my father. That was my first mistake. I met my fiancé, James, at a work event in Toronto about 3 years ago. He was there with a client. I was there representing my firm. He was the kind of quiet that's easy to mistake for boring until you realize he's just careful about what he says, careful about who he trusts, careful in the way that people are when they've learned that words have weight. We talked for 2 hours about lake ecology of all things. He knew more about it than I expected. He grew up in BC near the water. He understood why I loved the Parry Sound cottage in that specific way you can only understand if you've had a place like that yourself. We dated for a year before he met my family, not because I was hiding him, but because I was protecting him, or maybe protecting myself from having to watch my parents be politely disinterested in the person I loved because he wasn't my brother. When he finally did meet them, At a dinner at my parents' house in the fall, my mom was perfectly nice, and my dad asked him exactly 3 questions before turning the conversation back to my brother's new business venture, a gym franchise that was, at the time, just getting off the ground. James didn't say anything about it on the drive home, but he reached over and held my hand and kept it for the whole 2 hour drive back to the city. That told me everything. We got engaged in January of last year. He asked me on the dock at the Parry Sound cottage in the snow, which sounds impossibly romantic and was actually extremely cold. And I said yes before he even finished the sentence because I already knew. I called my parents that same evening. My mom cried happy tears. My dad said, "That's great, sweetheart," and immediately asked if James had good job security. I told him James worked in private equity. My dad said, in the way that means he has no idea what that is, but doesn't want to admit it. Planning a wedding in Canada is expensive. Anyone who has done it knows this. A mid-size wedding in Ontario can easily run $60,000 to $80,000, and that's being careful. James and I had agreed we'd keep it small, maybe 60 people, something meaningful, not a performance. We weren't trying to impress anyone. But I'd been counting in my grandmother's fund, not the whole thing, but enough to cover the venue deposit and catering down payment, about $15,000. I'd mentioned this to my dad months earlier, and he'd said it was fine. The money was there, just let him know when I needed it. In April, I let him know. He went quiet on the phone. Then he said he'd talk to me in person. That was the Sunday dinner. The one where he sat across from me with his arms crossed and that expression on his face like he was delivering practical news, not detonating something. "We transferred the cottage fund to your brother. He needs it more than you do." He needs it more. My grandmother's money, the money she left for me, with a letter addressed to me, the money I had trusted my father to hold. I asked him to repeat himself. I genuinely thought that I had misheard. He repeated it. My brother's gym franchise had hit a rough patch. 2 locations losing money, a lease dispute, payroll issues. My parents had already given him money twice in the past year. This time, they decided my grandmother's fund was the solution. "It's family money," my dad said, "and your brother needs it right now. You have James, you'll be fine." "You have James," as if that settled it. As if my fiancé's existence cancelled out the fact that my father had just given away the inheritance my grandmother left me, without asking, without telling me, without a single conversation. My mom was nodding along. She said gently, "We knew you'd understand, sweetheart. You've always been the strong one." The strong one. That's what they call you when they've decided it's okay to take things from you. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why. Maybe shock. Maybe something older than shock. I looked at the table. I looked at my brother, who was still not looking at me. He'd known. He had known before I walked through the door that night, and he had said nothing. He had let me sit down, let my mom serve the roast chicken. Let us get through 2 courses before my dad said it. James hadn't said anything yet. He'd been quiet since the moment my dad finished speaking. I could feel him beside me, very still, in the way he goes still when he's deciding something. My dad started talking about the practical side, how my brother would pay it back, how it was really just a loan, how family takes care of family. James put his hand on the table, flat, the way you do when you're about to say something carefully. "Can I ask," he said, very quietly, "who authorized that transfer?" My dad blinked. "What?" "The transfer from the estate account. Whose name was on it as the account manager?" My dad said his own name because I'd trusted him to hold it. "And did you have Elena's written authorization to move those funds?" Silence. My brother finally looked up. "James," my mom started in a warning tone. "I'm just asking," James said. He didn't raise his voice. He never raises his voice. Because that account was designated in the estate documents for Elena specifically. The letter from her grandmother is part of that record, so a transfer without her authorization is. "It was a family decision," my dad said. His face had gone red. "It was her money," James said. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't lean forward or make it dramatic. He just said it, the way you state a fact you are completely certain of, and let it sit there on the table between the serving dishes and the half-empty wine glasses. My dad opened his mouth. My brother said, "Dad, maybe." James reached into his jacket pocket and set his phone on the table, screen up. I didn't know what he was doing at first. Then he said, "I want to show you something." He turned it toward my parents. "This is an offer letter I signed 2 weeks ago." I hadn't seen it. He hadn't told me yet. He'd been waiting for the right moment. He told me later, and apparently this was it. It was a senior partnership offer from one of the largest private equity firms in the country. The signing bonus alone was more than my grandmother's entire fund. The annual compensation package made my mom's expression change so fast, I almost felt sorry for her. "I wasn't planning to share this tonight," James said. "Elena knew I was in the process, but I wanted to wait until everything was finalized. I only found out for certain on Friday." He put the phone back in his pocket. "I want to be clear," he said, still in that same quiet voice, "that this has nothing to do with whether what happened tonight was right or wrong. It was wrong, regardless of what's in my bank account. The money Elena's grandmother left was hers. The fact that you assumed she had another option doesn't change that." He looked at my dad directly. "And I'd like to understand what the plan is to return it." The kitchen was completely silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the refrigerator humming. My brother looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. My mom's hands were folded tightly in her lap. My dad's face had gone through red and come out the other side into something pale and uncertain. I thought about my grandmother at that table. I thought about her letter. I thought about 25 years of being the strong one, the low-maintenance one, the one who would understand. I pushed back my chair. "I think we're done for tonight," I said. "I want to tell you that I was calm and composed and said something meaningful. Mostly I just needed to not be in that room anymore." James got our coats. We said nothing on the way to the car. When he started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, I put my face in my hands and I did cry then. Finally, not because of the money, or not only that, but because of the letter and my grandmother. And the particular grief of realizing that someone who has disappointed you many times can still disappoint you in a new way. James drove for a few minutes without speaking. Then he said, "I should have shown them that offer letter differently. I didn't want it to look like a flex." I laughed. Actually laughed, which surprised me. "It was a little bit of flex," I said. "Yeah," he admitted, "maybe a little." In the weeks that followed, the calls came. My mom first, then my dad, then my brother, each with a slightly different version of the same message. My mom said they hadn't meant to hurt me and they hoped I could understand the position they'd been in. My dad said family has to stick together and he'd always planned to make it right. My brother said he was sorry I was upset. He was sorry I was upset. Not sorry for taking $40,000 that weren't his. Sorry that my feelings were happening. I stopped answering. A family friend, my mom's age, someone I'd known since childhood, called me on a Tuesday afternoon, clearly dispatched as a diplomat. She said my parents were devastated and that family is complicated and that I'd regret it if I let money come between us. I said as politely as I could that the money wasn't what it was about. She asked what it was about then. I thought about my grandmother's letter, which I'd had laminated after the estate was settled, which is now in a frame on my desk because I never want to lose it again. I thought about every Christmas and every Sunday phone call and every time I'd been the one who would understand. "My grandmother saw me," I said, "and then my parents took that too." She didn't have much to say to that. James and I got married in September. 62 people at a venue outside of Guelph that had a big old barn and a field that went golden in the evening light. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. My best friend from university did the flowers. We had a bluegrass band and a lot of wine and a dessert table that got completely demolished by 9 o'clock, which I considered a success. My parents weren't there. My brother wasn't there. That was a decision I made slowly, over several months, and then all at once, when I realized I was dreading the idea of seeing them more than I was excited about the day itself. A wedding is supposed to be the day you feel most yourself, surrounded by people who actually know you. I wasn't willing to compromise that. Some people in my extended family didn't understand. A few of them said so directly. I let them feel however they needed to feel about it. What I remember most about that day is this. James and I had a moment. About an hour after the ceremony, just the two of us on the far side of the field, while our guests were at cocktail hour. The sun was starting to go down. The light was that specific late September light that makes everything look like it's glowing from inside. He looked at me for a second and then he just said, "We did it." Not later, over the phone, in the dry bear, 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 which I'd suppose we had been. My grandmother would have loved him. I've had people ask me, since then, whether I regret cutting my family off, whether I worry I'll want them back someday, whether I'm angry. I'm not angry. That surprised me. I expected to be. But what I mostly feel is something quieter than that. Relief, I think. The relief of not waiting anymore, of not hoping that this time will be different, that this time they'll see me, that this time the scales will balance. The waiting was the exhausting part. Once I stopped, I felt lighter than I had in years. My grandmother saw me. I'm learning to keep seeing myself. The cottage, as it turned out, had been left separately. To my mom, not to the estate fund. It's still there, near Parry Sound. Itilecaberry Sound, and I expect my parents still go in the summers. I don't know for certain. I don't ask. But James and I have been looking at a small place up near Georgian Bay. Older cabin needs some work, deck that faces the water. We made an offer last month. It was accepted. I used to think that being the strong one was a compliment. It took me a long time to understand it was an assignment I never agreed to take on. My grandmother knew. She watched quietly for years, the kind of watching that doesn't announce itself, and she put $40,000 into an account and wrote me a letter that said, essentially, "I see you." That letter meant more to me than the money ever did. Which is why what my father didn't just hurt financially. It felt like someone reaching into the one place I'd been told was safe and taking something that had nothing to do with them. But here's what I've come to understand, sitting with it all this time later. The way things unfold is rarely random. My father made a choice that revealed something true. My brother accepted money that wasn't his and said nothing, which revealed something true. My mother nodded along, which reveals something true. None of those things were new. I've been sensing them my whole life, the way you sense weather before it arrives. What changed was that I finally stopped telling myself I was misreading the sky. James didn't rescue me that night. I want to be clear about that. He said what was accurate in a quiet voice, and he stood beside me. The difference matters. A person who rescues you keeps you dependent. A person who rescues you keeps you dependent. A person who stands beside you helps you see your own footing. That's the kind of intelligence I didn't know I was looking for until I found it. Not just academic or professional intelligence, but the kind that understands when to speak and what to leave unsaid. The kind that reads a room and chooses honesty over comfort anyway. What I had to reckon with was my own part in all of it. Not the theft, that was not my fault. But the years of making myself convenient, of absorbing disappointment quietly and calling it strength, of trusting my father with something precious because confronting the alternative felt too heavy. There's a kind of courage that's loud and obvious, and then there's the kind that's just getting honest with yourself about what you've been tolerating and deciding slowly that you're done. The second kind is harder. It doesn't come with applause. I think about the cottage near Georgian Bay that James and I are buying. I think about the dock we'll build, the winters we drive up for long weekends, the mornings I sit with coffee and watch the water. My grandmother had a place like that. She understood what it means to have somewhere that belongs to you. Not because someone gave it to you, but because you chose it and you stayed. What my family took, I rebuilt. Not out of spite. Though I won't pretend spite wasn't somewhere in the background early on. I rebuilt it because I have always been, underneath all the years of being the low-maintenance one, someone who knows her own worth. That knowledge got buried for a long time under the weight of wanting to be loved by people who found it easier to take from me than to see me. My grandmother saw me. James sees me. I'm learning finally to stop shrinking myself for rooms that were never going to be big enough anyway. The offer on the cabin was accepted. We close in November. I already know what I'm going to do first. I'm going to sit on that deck in the cold, look at the water, and just be exactly where I am. That's enough. That's everything.